Welcome to BentBrewers Live, proudly brought to you by Bespoke Brewing Co. Here we are, we're in the cannery, and we're about to do our first sensory session, or our take into quality. Cheers. But before we deep into quality, I'm going to answer your queries that keep coming through about our can lids. I'm going to have my little rant again, and that is that unfortunately we can't use these can lids anymore because A, we can't get them. They're not making them anymore in the US where we were getting them. So we're trying to come up and create our own lid, so stay tuned for that. But you're going to have to wait around a little bit because it's not all that quick to do that. So, but keep with us. We're going to try and get our own lid going. Secondly, even if we had the lids, we couldn't use them in New South Wales because they've actually banned them from next year. So hopefully we'll come up with our own lid. We'll get it registered in New South Wales and we'll be able to move forward with an open top lid. But on the show this week, we've got a special guest, a long-time friend of mine and Trace. She's been around a lot longer than me in the beer industry, knows a hell of a lot more about beer than most people do. And I'd really like to welcome to the show Tina Panoutous from Carlton United Brewing down in Victoria. Welcome, Tina.
Hi, Richard. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, look, we're going to dive in tonight. We're going to get into a little bit of sensory. We're going to start to talk to people about different flavours in beer that sometimes are good flavours, but potentially most of the time they're not so good flavours. We've got some beautiful ingredients here. We've got some lime that we're going to use. We've got some Werther's Originals. We've got some Parmesan cheese, some Band-Aids. We've got some nail polish remover too. Going to have to be a bit careful with that. We're probably not going to drink that one. But these are some of the flavours that we're going to put in our beers. And I think if you saw the little prologue we did earlier in the week, we got you to get a few glasses ready and a lager, a pale ale, and an IPA. So we might kick off and get the first one going because we've got a little bit of infusing time that we want to allow for on some of these to really bring out these flavours and really showcase some of these fault flavours that you do find in beers. And Tina will talk us through where they come from and her take on some of these flavours. So I think for the first one, what we're going to do is we're going to get a glass. You should have a few glasses there. So just pour a little sample in the glass. It doesn't need to be too much. It only needs to be a little bit. You want to do that again in your separate glass. And then you want to do the same thing with your pale ale and your IPA. Now let's keep the control beer separate. So the one that we're not going to infuse with any weird and wonderfuls, let's just keep that over here and let's use the one in front of us as our infuser. So let's do that now with our pale ale. We'll do 2 glasses of pale ale. A little bit of work involved tonight, but that's all good. And the last beer we're going to do is IPA. So we're going to pour a little bit of IPA. And I've got the crankshaft, a bit partial to a crankshaft after a long day at work. And there we go. We've got all our beers lined up. I've got it mixed up already. That's great, isn't it? So I'm sure everyone else has got it mixed up. But here we go. We're all separated out now. So now what I want you to do is grab your lime and put a nice generous squeeze of lime into one of your lagers, one of your pale ales, and one of your IPAs. And just give those a little swirl just to mix those in a little bit. And I think what we're going to do now is we're going to pick up, in one hand you want to hold the control, and in the other hand you want to hold the glass that's been infused. And so what I'd like you to do is take a bit of a swirl with that, experience the aroma, have a little bit of taste of it as well. Really get that beer all around the palate, really draw out those flavours of that pale ale that you've used. And then what I want you to do, in fact, what we might do now is we might just throw to Tina. And Tina, what beers have you got there tonight?
I've got, and I'll give you reasons why I've picked these. I've got Great Northern as the lager, the 4 Pines Pale Ale as my pale ale, and Pirate Life IPA as the IPA, like just keeping it consistent with you. And obviously there's different beers will have different characteristics and takes on the flavours that we're doing. But just to sort of reinforce the importance of doing or having a reference glass is so that you create a baseline of what currently is that, that flavour and the profile of the beer. And then once you've done something to it, you can find the difference. Because I think the key thing with sensory, there are a few key components in, making sure that you get the most out of it. And the first thing is making sure that you can identify a difference. Once you've identified a difference, then you drill down and go, well, what's that difference? So like you just said before, the key thing initially is pick up both glasses. So that I don't confuse myself, I've tried to use a couple of different glasses for my references, but pick up your reference.
A bit of professional and maybe has done this before, different glasses.
Maybe a couple of times.
So we've got the sour one here. So now everyone's had a taste of their base lager. Let's get on to our infused lager with the lime. And what is everyone picking up?
The key thing probably, sorry, Rich, here is that try and ignore for what we're doing here today. And like you said at the beginning, we're looking at some key flavours that generally are picked up as faults. And here everyone will pick up the lime aroma, and that's pretty good because it's the zestiness and so on. So you get a fruity character. But I think what we need to focus here tonight is what it's doing to your palate, because sour is one of the taste flavours. A lot of the other ones that we've got are really predominantly aroma flavours, and where in this case it's sour. So the focus here with these first three samples is have a think about what it's doing to your palate. Where's the differences? So like you just said, what's everyone picking up? You tell me what you're picking up.
Yeah, well, obviously, what I'm picking up with this is it's definitely contributed to the acidity, which has contributed to the sourness. And I'm getting that left part of my palate. The left part of the tongue is sort of standing out a little bit. I believe I got that right. I think it's the sour part of your palate. So that's what I'm getting. I'm getting, it's definitely thinner on the finish, and that's come through from the acidity that's contributed now to this beer.
Yeah, spot on.
And where does the acidity come from?
The acidity generally, it's essentially one of the key attributes through fermentation, and obviously different types of styles will produce a higher or lower acidity. Kettle sours, barrel-aged beers, you've got a different level of acidity across the palate. And just like you said, sometimes the emphasis is on how puckering it can be. I think everyone also on this point here is that to pick up the different levels of sourness, and you get sournesses in Berliner Weisses that'll be different to a kettle sour, and that's overall, the profile of the beer plays a big role in that. But where you pick it up on your palate, something like this, like lime juice or lemon juice, is really good to identify. Now, you've said that you pick it up on the left side of your palate. First of all, I want to debunk that theory of where you pick up, sweet, salty, sour, and bitter, and all the rest of it. But generally, if you identify a certain, and this is why it's important to always do this with a reference or with someone else, just to sort of throw back, comments, because where you pick it up is an individual thing. We're all genetically different, and we all pick up certain flavours in different areas, different ways, and make a connection, because our predisposed experience, or our experience is predisposed to what, foods we eat, what alcohol we drink, what other beverages we have, what our likes and dislikes are like. So I pick it up like you on the sides of my tongue, but overall across, and it goes right into the sides of my cheeks. So if I'm having a Berliner Weiss, for example, I know that I'll pick up a bit of tartness, bit of puckering. A kettle sour is a little bit similar, but the hop notes, the bigger body, fuller alcohol really starts to mask that. But ideally, and this is why it was great that when you suggested to do different beers as we move through, that should be picked up. So the lager is the one beer that you pick up certain flavours, and there aren't a lot of places to hide, but it's a good base beer to really start your sensory knowledge off and experiences before you start introducing things like hops and malt characters and caramel notes and so on. Yeah. So the sourness is, identifying where you pick it up, and then how it can be different in different styles of beers based on the fermentation, different characteristics that come through is really important, and that's an individual thing.
Yeah, well said. I totally agree with all of that. So I think we should probably look at moving on to the pale ale and now seeing the difference between, tasting the sourness in a lager versus a pale ale. So I think you need to go through that same process now again. Control beer. And then we move on to the infused beer. And for me, it becomes a little bit more noticeable in a beer like a pale ale because there's bitterness there in the pale ale. And I think the acidity actually really helps the bitterness come to the fore. So that's what I'm getting. I'm getting it. The bitterness certainly comes out. The beer becomes unbalanced. And the acids that you get from poor fermentation or bacterial spoilage are contributing, certainly contributing at high bitterness levels in these beers. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the things that we often look at when we're talking about beer spoilage as well. So sourness, acidic, all these characteristics can be contributed through beer spoilage. And that sort of sourness is really, a really bad funk sort of character.
Yeah, that's right.
And it does throw the balance right off. And as you really quite rightly, identified in the beer, in the pale ale, even the 4 pints that I'm having at the moment, it's really accentuated the bitterness, but in a really harsh, resinous way. And it's almost like, a really
mouth. It sort of fills the cheeks and.
Yeah.
So I'm not thinking this IPA is going to be any good either. So let's go to the IPA now. Yeah. Really step it up a notch. Make sure you do your control beer first. Well, for me, that's amazing that this acid souring effect we've done really does change the IPA so much more than the lager. Everyone thinks you've got this really clean, simple lager over here, got a really hoppy, with a nice malt backbone IPA over here. But when you actually put this souring into this beer, it changes the beer considerably. This beer is now so unbalanced and bitter and dry. My mouth right now, I need some cheese and some biscuits to really reset that. And actually, when we're judging, we usually have some biscuits and some cheese here, and I've stuffed this up. I've only got Parmesan. I'm not going to have that. So I'll battle on. But the IPA really has become such an unbalanced beer that I wouldn't even consider even getting it past the bright beer tank. Once it was in the bright beer tank and it tasted this unbalanced and bitter, it would never go in a bent spoke can. So that's one of the reasons why we do a lot of things a little differently to some breweries, not all breweries, but some breweries, and that is we don't actually repitch our yeast for one, because we don't have a facility to be able to propagate good live yeast. We want to make sure that we pitch fresh yeast each time. We don't try and repitch cone to cone, because you can't actually be accurate with how much yeast you're pitching, and that's really important. Consistent fermentation equals consistent quality. And if you don't have consistent fermentation, you're not going to get consistent quality. And most sourings in beer come through bad yeast handling, in my experience with a lot of breweries out there. So be really careful with that repitching of your yeast and bring any foreign objects in. Tina, in a bigger brewery, you no doubt obviously have a yeast propagation plant that you use, but I'm sure there's still ways that beer souring can come from the yeast part.
Yeah, it can, but like you said, that there are really strict measures in place to make sure that yeast strain, every time we propagate, it's not for all brands as well either, but the brands that we do repropagate yeast, there are really strict guidelines as to the purity and the consistency of the yeast, because as you just said, you lose the consistency of your key brands or any brands at all, and you're shooting yourself in the foot because you no longer provide that reliability in the beer flavour that the consumer's expecting. And also, even if it's the first time that they're going to pick it up, chances are that it's not going to be as palatable as what the intention of that beer is going to be. So you're absolutely spot on. The care and the quality and the consistency of your yeast is one of the first and foremost key quality considerations for any brewer. Absolutely.
Yeah, great. Well, I think I went a lot apart from what I've done is I've got rid of all my controls. You can actually keep your controls. You can keep those glasses full. You just need to now get rid of the infused glasses, and we'll move on to the next one, and we'll actually get that. We'll get the next one infusing. We want to give it a bit of time. So once we get it infusing, we'll come and ask a couple of questions. I can see quite a few questions being fired in. So we'll go to a question in a minute. So go back. You've got your lager in your control. You've got your lager in your infused one. Do the same with the pale ale. And lastly, the IPA. And then we're going to get good old Mr. Parmesan over here. And we're going to put a little bit of Parmesan in our beer. It will knock the foam around, I think, a little bit, but that's not what we're after today. We're after this flavour that comes from Parmesan that we do see in lots of beers around the place. There we go. We've got a nice bit of Parmesan in there. We're going to give these a good swirl around to make sure that they do get infused. I've added a bit too much, I think. It's not really infusing, but I'll definitely be able to get the aromas.
Looking a bit hazy there.
A bit hazy, yep, that's right. And so we might just go to a quick question now. Tina, how did you get into beer?
I studied chemistry in uni, so I graduated as a chemist and then did a postgrad in education. Wasn't sure what I wanted to do. There was a while there that I didn't know whether I wanted to travel or whatever. A friend said to me, hey, look, there's a job going in the lab at Carlton United where she was working at the time. And I went, yeah, look, why not? I'll give it a crack, see how it goes, give it a bit of time, wet my feet in the industry and see how it went. And then when I started, I thought, worked in the QA lab, and that was really interesting, and sort of getting to understand beer and, the passion that the brewers had behind making beer. To me, it was always just something that was at the table, or it was never thought about it that much. And then all of a sudden I'm working with it and everything and coming home smelling like hops. But I gave myself 2 years, and then I stuck around for a lot longer than that because it was just something that I thought really interested me, the whole chemistry behind brewing, the whole sensory. As soon as I got my feet wet in sensory, there was no looking back. I absolutely loved it. And it was at a time where there weren't a lot of females or brewers or females tasting beer. So I just sort of felt really excited because I thought and I love cooking. So it was almost just another step across, a culinary experience, and I just fell in love with it. Really, really did.
Yeah, that's,
the rest is history, I suppose.
I think we're indebted to have someone like you in our industry.
Thanks.
And not only that, I honestly do believe in my 25 years and all my interactions with other ladies in our industry that ladies actually have better palates than men as well, and that's been proven time and time again. I'm actually serious about that. I'm not sure why that is, but it's become quite obvious on more than multiple occasions all around the world. And so, congratulations on your career.
Thanks. And look, you make a good point about the females being quite good at the sensory perception and ability to sort of identify flavours and characteristics. And I think it's twofold. There's a lot of science behind women having a more acute palate, or being a larger proportion of super tasters. But it's also, I think, in just the way in which we sort of articulate colours, flavours, the language that might be used to be a bit more descriptive. I think we're sort of geared more towards, either perfumes or scents or whatever. So innately, I think it's the way in which we think about, or a lot of women might think about it. But, equally, I've had a number, cross-section of different people across different panels, tasting panels, that are amazing. And it's not so much gender specific, Obviously, we have, it's weighted more towards men because of the nature of the industry, that we have more men on taste panels. But yeah, equally, I think it's the way in which you sort of dive into it and describe it, and the way you've done it today, even, or even the last, podcast, or not podcast, sorry, shows that you've done, you hear people talking about beer in ways that 20 years ago no one would have.
Yeah, well, it's funny because we've got our first question through from the Thirsty Hop, and hey Pete, you might want to turn your mic off there too. By the way, the Thirsty Hop has come forward with a question: are there any undesirable flavours, aromas for certain beers that you feel work for that style? There are certainly, and I think if you've seen a couple of the episodes we've done earlier, we've talked about characters in our barrel aged beers that we've aged with certain bacteria, and I love the words sweaty horse blanket and zoo-like aromas, and they're all the ones that you do want in some of those beers, but you probably don't want those flavours in a nice lager or a pale ale, an IPA for that matter. So, Tina, you got an undesirable flavour that you love to see in a beer?
I'm just trying to think, as you were saying that, like, I don't mind, in the right beer, I don't mind that funky Brett character that you get in a lot of barrel aged beers, in the right balance and with the right characteristics. If it's in the background and it's well blended, I sometimes will sort of get my kids, now that they're of adult, legal drinking age, get them to try it, and it's just something that I think is a developed character, or you become more familiar with it, with an expanded breadth of flavours and experiences and different styles that you have within your own portfolio. But yeah, I don't mind a little bit of Brett in the right beer.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah. Well, we might get into this second one. We've got our Parmesan, so we're going to have the control beer first, and we'll now get into our Parmesan. It's cheesy. It's funny.
And look, cheesy can be quite different to a lot of people too, depending on the cheese that you use. And the cheesiness comes from, obviously, it's again another byproduct of fermentation. It's one of the fatty acids, and if everyone's got a spare glass, just to keep the one that's that's strongest, to keep it aside and let that beer really warm up, because fatty acids really develop with time, and the warmer it is, the cooler the beer is, the colder it is, the more subdued that the fatty acids are, and they don't actually come to the fore until the beer is a little bit warm and degassed a little, and it really sort of comes up as cheesy, vomity, not really great, but yeah.
We might move on to the pale ale and see how that actually impacts things. I mean, for me this time around, I'm getting a bit of less impact because I've got a bit of hop character there. I've got a bit of malt character to actually hide away a bit of that cheese. The cheese is certainly there. And it's interesting when you go and look at Belgian breweries, and they generally, what they do is they hide away their hops, and they wait for those hops to be 4 or 5 years old before they're going to use them. So if you go into a Belgian brewery and you get to see where they store their hops and go and smell some of their hops, they actually smell really cheesy. Hop, the hops get broken down by access to oxygen. They create that cheesy character. The Belgian brewers use them in such small amounts that they're not really contributing to the flavour, but that's the character that I get from that cheese. So there's two parts of this cheese. It's, like Tina said, the fatty acid component that comes through, but also that cheesy hop character which comes from using really poorly stored hops and really old hops. And I say poorly stored because if you put some hops out in the sun for a few hours, you're going to get a little bit of cheese off them. It can happen pretty quickly. So really important for brewers out there to store their hops really cold and make sure they seal the bags. And it's a lot of breweries I go to, I see them using those snap lock bags and they think that's all right. But to be honest, you're still snapping a lot of that oxygen in that bag. So I really recommend you roll the bags and really squeeze out all that oxygen and then tape them up. and that way you're going to have less oxygen to kilo of hop sort of ratio, and those hops will last, especially when you're in a brew pub. And I think we've got 40 hops, potentially 30 half open bags in the brew pub, and it's important to make sure that if you're using hops, you might not use them every week, so you need to make sure they're stored properly. We go through to the IPA now. Tina, what are you getting in the IPA?
There's a lot of hop. The hop character is definitely dominating it. The cheese is starting to smell like I've freshly grated some Parmesan, and where you get that nice fresh character in the IPA, it's become a little bit more rancid. So it's mixing in with a bit of the caramel malt, the like nice, like really big hop character that I've got out of the Pirate Life, but it's just become quite rancid and like old oil. So it's really not. It's really thrown the nice hop character out, and it's just become really quite flabby.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect description, rancid and flabby. I think I maybe have written that a few times on a few judging sheets over the years. So I think, that's exactly what I'm getting. And I think if people out there are getting an IPA with that sort of flabby character, it might be a couple of things. It might be poor fermentation, and that can lead back to what I said earlier about making sure you do pitch really good quality yeast. You do have good fermentation, but also it could be from somebody using poorly stored hops, even if they're in the same hop year. So, if you poorly store some 2020 hops, they're going to give you a cheesy character. Okay, so we'll keep going. Although there is one question up there. Megan put in a question. We found the lime really impacted on the mouthfeel of the beers. They taste a lot smoother, thinner. Is that typical for the addition of citrus or sheer coincidence? No, it's not coincidence. I think the additional acidity really does mean that the body or the mouthfeel is diminished, and that palate of yours is really picking up those acidic characters, and that's why you're perceiving that to be thinner. So good question. Keep those questions coming in.
Really good point.
We've got a smart-ass one from Lockie McBean at Grainfed. Hey, Tina, what's a super taster? And how do you become one?
A super taster isn't something that I think you become, because it all depends on what your taste buds are like. So genetically, some people have quickly proliferating taste buds, so that when they die they come back again quite quickly. They have larger taste buds, so they're able to sort of pick up more taste and flavours, and the sensitivity to a lot of different things is generally more acute. So you can get I don't place a lot of importance on who super tasters are, or pick a taste panel based on whether or not they're super tasters. Because I think it's a technique and an ability that you can train yourself. And we're going to get to one of the flavours that I'll touch a little bit more on. And I know that a lot of brewers are blind to it, but they find ways in which they can identify certain flavours because of how it impacts on everything else. So I think, super tasters are capes.
Yeah, let's start infusing the next one, because we want to give this one a little bit of time as well. So pick your control beer. Make sure you have your control beer there. Get a little bit of your 3 beers ready. And what we're going to do is we're going to drop one of these Werthers straight into the glass and just let it infuse in the glass. We'll try and give this just a little bit of time to really get these flavours out. Give them a swirl around. We'll just park those ones there for the moment. We're going to move on to a couple of other ones, which we're not going to infuse in beer, because I don't want you guys suing me for stirring Band-Aids in your beer. So we'll pick up the Band-Aid, the old classic Band-Aid. We get this a lot when we're judging beers. It's amazing how many times you actually can get the flavour out of a Band-Aid. So the Band-Aidy flavour, Tina, you might want to talk us through this one. This is probably you're quite partial to this character when you're judging.
Yeah, I am really sensitive to this, and this is like when you pick it up, sometimes it's even this, or like what's the word for it? Sports tape, or opening up a medicine case, or like mouthwash, or really chemical antiseptic notes and stuff. Band-Aid is one thing that everyone sort of thinks about, that adhesive part, and as soon as they put it on, it's medicinal. And this is generally chlorophenol or chlorophenolic, and it's never ever a good characteristic, because it always comes through from situations where packaging materials or might be faulty, or there's certain characteristics that within the packaging material, they're old, that can sort of leach into the beer through either the bottles, the cans, the cardboard boxes, and it provides this really medicinal sort of chemical note. And it's not favourable. You don't always pick it up on the taste. It's really quite volatile, so the aroma is really quick, and it can flash off, but it definitely comes across as almost even cleaning agent. And there's a lot of times where you need to sort of, in a brewery or in draft systems, where say chemical taints can infiltrate into the beer, if they're not properly cleaned, you can get a chemical taint coming through, and it's at the levels that we get, generally not harmful to your health, but it does really sort of give that unfavourable character. It's never ever a good note.
And that's right. And I put my Band-Aid over there now, so I'm going to just sip on a little crankshaft while we go to the next one. But my experience is that, once again, this goes back to yeast, and another reason to be very careful with your yeast propagation, your yeast pitching, and just your yeast health and what you do with it. And one way to take that out of the equation a lot of the time is to pitch fresh yeast each time. So there we go. We've got Band-Aid character, chlorophenol that certainly destroys really good flavours in beer. So we move on to the next one. We've got some nail polish remover. So not sure how everyone's got that at home, but I'm not going to pour this in my beer. I'm just going to waft it. You just want to waft it across because it's really strong. You don't need to close one nostril and try and get a lot in. You just want to waft it across. And what do you get there, Tina? What are you getting there?
It's solventy now, and this is one of the esters that, again, fermentation byproduct. It's in all beers. Levels can vary based on the yeast, the temperature, fermentation conditions, yeast health, contaminants, and so on. So the amount generally, you get a good balance in most beers across a range of esters. The one that we're looking now, ethyl acetate or the acetone, is one of the solventy esters, and generally within balance to some of the fruitier esters. It provides a nice top note to the beer. If it's not heavily hopped, in a really hoppy beer, you're not going to get it. But based on the fermentation conditions, you could really throw the yeast ester profile out, and you can get really harsh solventy characters like this. And a good exercise to do at home is maybe just, and like you said at the beginning, don't taste it because you don't want to be ingesting any, but if you know anyone who paints their nails or whatever, you're bound to have smelt it somewhere. And we've all sort of smelt aeroplane glue. But if you just put a drop in a glass of beer and not taste it, tip it out straight after, you can see what a higher solventy character can do to the profile of the beer. And maybe that's something everyone can take away with after this session, is just to sort of put a drop in one of the beers before they tip them out, smell it, and then tip it, because the hop profile, what that does is it does generally mask a lot of the esters, whereas in the lager it should be a bit more pronounced. And if it happens, that the solventy notes, like ethyl acetate, a little bit high, sometimes you can get quite a harsh stripping character, quite dry on the palate, and it's different to something that's been, fermented out, that it's really quite a dry finish. It's really quite harsh, and sometimes it's quite stripping.
Yeah, and my experience with getting a bit of feedback there, my experience with esters over in the UK when they're doing those cask conditioned real ales and really keeping those hops to a minimum and really letting the yeast shine a lot. And you do get a lot of real fruity esters over there. You're trying not to get these type of esters or nail polish remover, ethyl acetate esters. You want to get those, real nice peachy esters, or maybe a little bit of banana, and some of the nice esters that you can get from yeast fermentation. So the other thing is good esters come from good fermentation. Generally speaking, bad esters come from bad fermentation, generally speaking. So once again, make sure you have good, clean fermentation.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to the favourite. I think everyone should just really give their glasses another swirl, really just to try and get a little bit more of that Werther's infused in the beer. So let's start with the lager. Just refresh your palate with a bit of the control. And then with a little bit of your infused beer. Those lollies are made pretty hard. They certainly take a while to break down.
Yeah, and while that's
I'm certainly getting a little bit coming through. So
while that's still going, it might just be a good opportunity, Rich, to sort of just reinforce that a lot of these flavours, like you said, are generally, come down to the importance of cleanliness, hygiene, good brewing methods, good yeast health and things like that. And it's also things that can also happen downstream. So once you've done everything you can, things like butyric acid sourness or, acidic vinegary characters, and even the flavour that we're looking at now before we sort of let the cat out of the bag, but I'm sure everyone sort of knows it, they can happen through to as a result of spoilage in beer once it's been post-pack or in draft lines, and that's a really critical importance.
We've got a great question come through from BentBrewers, and that'll lead into sort of tasting this this beer we've infused now. Is what are some of the off flavours that can occur in beer after it leaves the brewery, i.e. if a pub doesn't clean their lines? And this is one of those flavours. So we've infused this with Werther's Originals. The idea here is we're trying to imitate some butterscotch or buttery character, which comes from the diacetyl compound that can be found in a lot of beers. I would have said most beers probably 10, 12, 14 years ago when we were judging, but now everyone's been a lot better at controlling their diacetyl production, and I'm really not noticing anywhere near as much as what we used to notice. And I think that's just because our industry's really grown up, and all the breweries are bringing people along together on this ride of better quality. I think we've still got a long way to go with better quality, but certainly a lot of breweries have set benchmarks, and we're all trying to follow those and bringing people along. Now, diacetyl, Tina, what's your experience with diacetyl?
I don't like it. No. You're absolutely right with how far we've come, especially what we've both seen in the last, say, 10, 15 years of judging. Things definitely have improved in as far as draft beer concerns with diacetyl, and it is one of the key factors that we look at with our draft systems as well, is making sure that there's no spoilage or there's no issues with the effect of diacetyl, because although some people can be blind to it, and this is one of the flavours that we've had some panellists tasters on our panels that have been blind to diacetyl, but they find ways in which it counteracts other flavours. And one thing that's really important is how it changes the aroma profile. So it, in some beers, in some ales, some stouts specifically, a lesser diacetyl rest helps maintain some of that diacetyl through the fermentation, and it provides a bit of that nice, sweet, butterscotchy note that sort of complements the likes of a stout or a dark ale, and really provides some of that smoothing, mouth coating, and really luscious or nice viscosity to the beer. Whereas in a lager or many pale ales or an IPA, it just throws everything, and you've got something that smells sickly sweet, butter popcorn or butterscotch caramel sauce, and you just sort of go, I don't know if it's the malt, or I don't know if it's, something's wrong with the beer. And it's really critically important to know what the actual beer should be like, which is what I was going to say beforehand, knowing what your profile or knowing what your lager tastes like. So as brewers, understand what the consistency of your beer is, or whatever style you're brewing, and then sort of chuck in something like this and sort of see how it throws the balance and throws the flavour. Or if you do happen to have a beer that's got a high level of diacetyl, compare it to something that doesn't, because really fine-tuning your ability to pick something like this up can make or break your brand. And No one
That's
really
right.
wants to smell, diacetyl in your beer.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really important that this compound does get picked up early. Most breweries do what they call diacetyl tests, and you can. There's a really neat little trick you can do. I'm pretty sure everyone knows it already, but it's if you want to test whether your beer's got diacetyl before you turn on the chilling. You can just pull a sample out of your beer, of the fermenter, and warm up that sample. In fact, the best way to do it is actually pull 2 samples out, warm one of those up to 40 degrees, and smell those 2 different samples. And the 40-degree one will really promote that diacetyl. And then you'll know whether that yeast has reabsorbed that diacetyl and whether you should leave it for another 24 hours and come back and do that test. That's something we do here at BentSpoke. We generally walk around and have a smell, have a bit of a sample of those beers before we put them on chill. Diacetyl for me works really well in a few styles, like English real ales, English style beers. A little bit of diacetyl really helps that beer come along. And it's also a textural element as well. That slickness that you get on the palate from the diacetyl really does go well with those really heavily malted beers. But if you're making beers that are hop forward and you need those hop flavours, diacetyl is one of your foes there. You want to get rid of diacetyl because it really blocks those really nice, tight, clean hop aromas. So I think we won't go through every sample here, but I think if you taste your pale ale and maybe go through to your IPA and see what the difference that diacetyl does make in the IPA, you'll start to see that if you have your control and you get those hop aromas, and straight away in the Fuse example, you just don't get any of those hop aromas. So they've all been disappeared or masked by that diacetyl. And I'll be honest with everyone out there is that I was pathetic picking up diacetyl when I started judging. I got a fair bit of grief from a lot of old codgers, shall we say, that were judging at the time. And I learnt and I trained my palate. So now I've got a lot better. Tracy, if you're over there, you come over here and taste a little bit of this beer. Tracy, my partner, the brewer at the brew pub, she very susceptible to diacetyl. Picks it up really, really easily. And I think it's once you really get diacetyl, then you can really train yourself to pick it up quite easily, and then that can influence your decisions you make in the brewery. So, I think to sum up now, we've gone through a few flavours. There's so many more flavours out there. There's so many more training and so many more flavours you can go through. We've covered off these 5 flavours tonight, but I think it's really important for brewers or people that are home brewing out there, even people who just love a good beer, to really experience what it means to put or what actually means to be able to pick up off flavours in beer. Because when you're out there putting your hard-earned money down for a beer, you want to make sure that beer is worth that hard-earned money you put down.
Absolutely.
I think if everyone does a little bit of work and a little bit of fun at home, there's a lot of information out there on the web in training yourself to pick up flavours. I think people then also start to experience what different styles mean as well. And where I'm going with that is that it's fine to understand lagers and pale ales and IPAs, but if a brewery suddenly puts out a Flanders Red style ale and there's all these really interesting characters in there, you'll actually get to know a little bit about those characters. You'll actually appreciate the work that's gone into that beer, and maybe you'll actually, even though you don't like it, you might actually respect it. And I think so many times I see out there in the media, in socials, that people are really having a go at a beer style that they know nothing about. They're picking up flavours that they know nothing about, and just because they don't like it means that all of a sudden that beer is the worst beer that they've ever had. So I think stepping through some of that process and understanding some of these flavours will go a long way for people really understanding what's gone into beer styles that have been made for hundreds and hundreds of years. So we really owe it to those brewers back centuries ago to really respect where some of those beer styles have come from and really try and appreciate what those brewers went through, 200 years ago. Sorry, turn a little rant there. I'm sure
that's all right.
I'm sure you can sympathise with beer styles that maybe don't, that are harder and less common, that have some really interesting flavours in.
No, I totally agree with you, Richard. I think there's a lot of stuff that, a lot of beer styles that whether you're spot on with whether you like them or not, you can appreciate the different craftsmanship that's gone into brew a number of different beers and what it takes to sort of promote or pronounce certain flavours within beer. So, you know, even the delicate balance of creating a hoppy beer, whether it's an English IPA versus an American IPA or an Australian IPA, the differences in the use and the craftsmanship of the hops for each one of those styles or variances of the styles, and how the hop character is either pronounced or sort of more subdued is really important in identifying certain characteristics. So it's not the same across the board. And I think that's where I've found one of the biggest differences is people's perception and you know, enjoyment of different styles of beers because of those different nuances in one sort of style. That's really important. And stuff that we've done here tonight is really easy to do at home as well. And even things like, you know, whether beer is oxidized or papery or light struck, they're things that you can do at home quite easily. Grab a couple of bottles that, you know, are likely to be light, you know, have a good hop character, chuck one out in the sunlight for half an hour or, you know, an hour or whatever, bring it back, put them both in the fridge, try them, and then you'll nail that light struck character. And using the same example with beer that you may have put in a boot of your car for a couple of weeks and the other one sat in your fridge, you can start to compare what heat and temperature does to the oxidation of beer. So you can start to develop your own little way. You know, there's heaps of kits out there that you can train yourself. And if you've got a group of people, it is one of the best ways to sort of train your palate. But it comes
like a fun night on a Saturday night. Sit around and chuck a whole lot of off flavours in beer over a few pizzas.
We are beer nerds though, Richard. So that is a fun night for us.
We got a heap of questions flowing in, and Thirsty Hop, you might answer this one. From the Thirsty Hop, with craft beer pushing boundaries and all sorts of flavours and ingredients being added, how much harder is it to judge taste beer now compared to 10, 20 years ago?
There's more practice that goes into it now. I know 10, 20 years ago, the majority of the beers that we judged with some of the, you know, elderly statesmen, shall we call them, they did, you know, they were predominantly lager style beers, especially from around Australia. But the homework that goes into it now, I know that I generally, coming up to a judging competition, I'll you know, consciously go out and try and skill myself or remind myself of what different styles are, especially the ones that I don't have that often, you know, barrel-aged triples or, you know, things that I'm not going to generally have a lot of throughout the course of a year. I might sort of start to look at and revise over, because it really does, like you said, someone's put their heart and soul into brewing that beer, and not to give it the justice that it deserves and the credibility of, you know, the judging panel, it's a shame. But yeah, a lot of practice.
No worries. You might have the next question if my aides can move it down for me there, please. Thank you very much. Daryl, I might add that we are giving away a merch pack for the best question in tonight and a little bit of beer, I think. So Daryl, who won our best question last week, he's back again. I've noticed that beers in bottles have a metallic flavour that I'm guessing comes from the bottle cap. Is this a common thing?
No.
You go.
Not from our experience, yeah. Not from our experiences. A lot of the bottle caps will be cured on the inside with, you know, like that little lining. So there's very rarely, I think I've often gotten comments that cans provide a metallic taste, but even cans are cured on the inside. So there's no real issue. And this comes down to when I get a panelist saying it's a bit metallic, I'll drill down and sort of see, is it sour, is it acidic, is it metallic, and sort of use those flavours to hone in on what is it that they're talking about. Because even salt can, you know, something that's a little bit briny, or, you know, there could be a fault and it's perceived as metallic. Hops sometimes give you a metallic astringency. So it's the interpretation of what people are identifying as metallic as what it might actually be a metallic taste. I'm not saying it's not, but very unlikely that it's from the bottle cap.
And so where would you get a metallic taste from? Like maybe it's you know, it's not coming from the bottle, but if a beer does get metallic taste, where do you find that comes from?
Generally processed, but a lot of breweries now are not, you know, geared up so that you haven't got pipes that are going to leach out any iron or anything like that, or packaging or processed materials are very unlikely, and that's why generally it's something that's attributed to hops, but it's very, very unlikely that you'll get a metallic character coming through in beer. And it is really, the sensitivity, the threshold of that is really low. So it would definitely be if you're getting something that's a little bit bloody, or a lot of people describe metallic as monkey bar smell, like the smell that you get on your hands after rubbing coins or playing on monkey bar. So it's one thing that I've noticed that can be confused for a number of different other flavours.
Yeah, I've heard of it coming from hops as well. So on the show a few times ago, we had Ryan Hopkins from Yakima Chief. So we might fire a question off to him and find out if he's ever experienced any hops that particularly give metallic taste. I love New Zealand hops, but I do find I sometimes get a metallic taste coming through from New Zealand hops. So maybe that could be attributed to a particular compound, a particular oil in those hops. I certainly can't answer that right now. I certainly don't have that information or know the answer to that as we sit here, but certainly something to find out and come back to you on, Daryl. Matty Chev, how do you find the right barrels for a beer like Phlegm? Considerations around pass-by, char. Do you find the shift of Canberra affects the oak character? With these barrels, I'm using these barrels really for a holding vessel to allow the bacteria to breathe, absorb a bit of oxygen, grow, and produce all those great flavours that I think we got in our Phlegm. It was a sessionable Flanders Red Ale. It wasn't supposed to be a big beer that you have a bottle of in a champagne glass and, had a couple of glasses. This beer was designed specifically to go into a can. I wanted to make this beer style accessible to people because I wanted people to experience what this beer style is like. And this beer style has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. And I think it's really important that our wider beer community, all the customers, all the fans and all the people that are right into their beer out there, maybe don't get to experience unless they lash out on $50 for one bottle or whatever. So we were trying to make a beer that sort of tried to breach a little bit of that and make this style accessible. So to answer your question, the barrels we choose are generally ones that we've removed all the oak character from. They can be red wine barrels, they can be white wine barrels, they can come from gin distillery. We've generally removed all the oak out of the barrels. We're using them as vessels to harbour the bacteria. We got one from down in Tassie from Van Diemen, Tina. Tina, have an all-time favourite beer or style?
Oh, I often, different. I think I can't pick, and I've been asked this a lot. I can't pick favourite styles or favourite beer. And I've said this before, it'd be like picking a favourite child and one of them's probably going to pipe up and say, it's me. But generally it is really hard. It's occasion-based. I think something that I was really enamoured with last year was the Blobfish Festival here in Melbourne, and how different styles have just sort of really encouraged people to try different things. So I like a range of beers. I love, honestly, everything from Carlton Draft through to, I don't know.
All beer is I've said it ever since I got into brewing and was lucky enough to experience judging at the University of Ballarat in a lab coat with those old codgers that were probably about 40 or 50 years older than me, but really good people in the industry. Those, they really got me into all different types of beers. And when you're judging, 10 different lagers that technically all look the same, they all have very subtle differences in aroma and flavour, and you've got to pick those out. So I really believe that even the guy who, runs the brewery at CUB down in Victoria, or the guy that's on the kegging line, he really loves his job and he really loves coming to work and making a difference to beer going out of that brewery. So I'm going to stick with it that all beer is crafted
Good on you, Richard.
Some beers are better than others, and there's certainly some beers that I prefer over others. But I think everyone who is lucky enough to work in a brewery, loves what they do and contributes to making that beer. So who cares? Who cares who owns the brewery? Who cares if it's small, medium, big? All beer is.
And look, it's probably a good thing that we can't pick favourites, because I think it just reinforces that there's a huge range of styles and flavours out there. For me, it's probably easier to pick one beer styles that I'm not that enamoured with. And there are two that I always sort of say, I'll give it a gold if it's within balance and everything, and I never judge a beer based on personal preference. And I've, two of those are things like beers like pumpkin ales and chili beers. To me, I don't really get them. I don't have I wouldn't go down the road and try and seek one out, but there have been some cracking pumpkin ales that we've judged in different competitions, because they're well integrated and well balanced, and the pumpkin character comes through. For example, the chili character is in balance with everything else, but they're not two beers that I'd pick. And that's probably an easier question. What's your favourite?
Yeah, good.
So sorry, I hope I didn't offend anyone, but
no, you answered that really well, really diplomatically, as you will have learnt in your time in the brewing industry, that you do have to be a little bit more diplomatic and probably not come up with beer names like Judges or Old Codgers. But anyway, David's come in and gone, how common is it to find these bad flavours in beer, and has the overall beer quality improved over the years? Look, I started judging in 99, so that's a few years ago. When did you start judging, Tina?
I think it was 2006, possibly. Yeah. Don't forget, different times, my friend. Different times.
For a long time. And I reckon back in the day, there's two parts to this question. One is my judging capabilities improved in the time I've been judging. So I understand there's actually quite a process to judge. You get all these beers in front of you. You've got to actually, look at them. You've got to assess them for appearance, aroma, flavour, whether they're style, their technical capability. You've got to do this pretty smartly. You've got to concentrate. You actually get mentally tired. You need to have a few beers after you've been judging. It's one of those things you just need to do because you're so mentally exhausted. So I've learnt how to go through that process probably quicker than I first started. I was one of the last judges to finish all the time when I started, and now I'm probably one of the first. It's not that I judge beers too quick. It's simply that I've learned how to process the judging process and actually do it in a more efficient way and do it in a better way. And I think that's one part. So that leads into the fact that I think beer has, as my judging's improved, I think the beer quality's improved as well. So I wasn't able to pick up all those flavours back in the day. So I probably didn't know how bad a beer was. But now I can experience all those flavours. Is that what you thinking the same, Tina?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you become the speed at which you judge, you become more proficient at how you analyse and critique a beer, or you review the beer, and that's why it's important. This is why when you suggested to do this, I thought this is fantastic, because it really reinforces how easy something like this would be. It's not as ideal as what capsules and taster kits are like, but it really does reinforce that you can identify, and as soon as you identify a difference between, say, your reference beer and something that's been dosed, you can pick up really quickly what that is, and you've locked it into memory. It's like whatever you like or dislike, and that process improves and your proficiency improves every time you do it. So as soon as you've smelt a beer that's got diacetyl and you think that shouldn't be there, you'll never forget it. You'll go back, and then the aim there is to refine your sensitivity and refine the level at which you can identify it. And that's what most breweries will do when they do set up a taste panel, is start off with the bare basics, and most of these flavours comprise the first 10 that most breweries will train a panel, and then they'll sort of go through each one, recognise it, and then let's fine-tune how well you can identify those, and in a mix of different beers. Because if you go back to the ones with the Werther's Original, you'll notice that they develop and you start to sort of pick up different things. And the more often you do that, the more proficient you become.
Yeah, good. We've got Bo Douglas in, and he says, "Good day, Richard and Tina. Firstly, Sprocket is my absolute go-to. Thanks very much, Bo. Yeah, I love a Sprocket as well, and it's actually the only can that we have at the moment with our 360-degree lid. Like I mentioned earlier, we can't use those lids at the moment, and we can't get them. So if you can get a Sprocket, you'll be able to experience that beautiful sensation of the aroma, being able to see the beer and the flavour out of a 360 can." His question, though, is there any advice you'd give to someone looking to get involved in the judging side of the industry?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think if I go back to my experience of how I got in, was just concentrating on making, I guess, some pretty good beer that won a few medals, and then getting asked to come in as a associate judge or apprentice judge, and serving my time there and learning from all the people around me. Some of those were the old codgers, but they taught me a heap, and it's probably why I can still only judge today. So I think I'm not sure where you're working, Bo, but if you're not working at a brewery, certainly get involved in your local homebrew club. We're really lucky in Canberra that we have an awesome amateur brew club called Canberra Brewers. They actually do these sessions like we've done tonight regularly throughout the year. You can get yourself involved in the club in one of these sessions. You can start to teach yourself about the flavours that can work really well in beers, but also the flavours we've done tonight that really sort of don't work well and you don't want to see in beer. So that'd be my take, would be either get involved from an apprentice judge type role through your brewery, and hit up the judging competitions around Australia, or contact your local home brew club and get involved with them and learn a lot about judging beer that way. Tina, anything to add there from your experience?
Couldn't agree with you more, Richard. And any opportunity you get with other brewers or even in a social event or with a group of, if you're a beer enthusiast, even just getting a lineup of different beers. And you mentioned it beforehand, you give the credibility to the beer that it's due, and it's important to sort of familiarise yourself with everything from something that's really subtle and light and delicate and doesn't have a lot of hops going through to it, really, to a double IPA, and start to familiarise yourself with those flavours and talk about them, because I think we can become quite insular about what we think and what our personal preference is. But part of that, getting into the judging scene, is really understanding the different characteristics, faults and good attributes, and then starting to be able to describe them. Things like, doing your BJCP, doing, the basic Cicerone beer server, starting to understand, do a bit of reading, but with that reading, actually sit down and taste half a dozen beers and actually think about it. Look at brewer's notes, because everyone that's brewing's got their, taste notes and profiles and whatever on their website. So it's always really good experience just to try different things. Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we've got time for maybe one more, and then we might wrap up tonight's session. But Petty Knife has come up with a question. Can the pitching temp cause off flavours? Tina, you might want to lead out on that one. Yeah,
it can. There's some really critical flavours that, your higher volatiles, things like your esters, your diacetyl, they're definitely, and to a lesser degree, your fatty acids definitely can sort of have an impact and detrimental impact to your beers. Generally, the lighter lagers will, that's quite crucial, because like you said before, there's no place to hide in some of these beers. But again, the ones that are more complex, it really throws a balance. So definitely detrimental. I think the more precise and careful you are with your brewing process and your raw materials, the better it is your outcome will be. But identifying some of those faults is critical right up front, as early as you possibly can. So don't wait till the last minute. Sort of you should, as a brewer, you should be tasting at each stage and understanding what those characteristics are for the beer style that you're brewing.
Yeah, I agree, and I think we just come back to the same thing all the time tonight, and that is that it's critical to make sure that you have really good
yeast,
really good yeast health, and really good fermentation, and that's why we dry hop a lot of our beers. We don't have facilities to separate out those dry hops from the yeast, so that's why we pitch fresh yeast each time, because we know that it's sterile, It's not. We're not going to get any contamination from, from going tank to tank. We also know exactly how many yeast cells we're going to pitch, so we get consistent fermentation. And I think that's really important to making good beer. Tina, we've got 2 questions left. Michael Olds says, any tips for homebrewing crankshaft? Michael, just wait a few minutes and I'll give you those. But Tina, one last question for you before we go, and that is, we've got a really great industry that's evolved over, especially the last 20 years. Where do you see our industry in 5 years?
I think what I enjoy seeing is the collaboration between brewers in understanding and working together, to do things like collaboration brews and sort of promote those to the general public. I think in 5 years' time, I'd like to think that we're not targeting or we're not looking at specific demographics of beer, and people, what I see now is that there's a really broad range of beer styles out there, and how we can sort of tap into the occasion for consumers. So I think that we're getting a long way, and I mentioned it before, and I think Brad mentioned it last week too, festivals like, Blobfish, where 5 years ago you would never have thought you'd get so many people over a course of a weekend coming in to taste sour beers, and I just sort of think that growth in smaller markets really puts a good lens on how diverse our industry can become from something that we were traditionally looking at, predominantly lagers. So I think there's definitely a stronghold on the traditional Australian beers, and predominantly lagers, because that's sort of a way in which that's a gateway into a number of different beers. But in 5 years' time, I think we've got we'll have good health, good growth in styles that we'd never seen before, or seen, as little blips on the radar. So I'm really excited about where beer's going. It's I always liken it to a big ship. It moves slowly. Big ships take a while to sort of turn, but it's turning, and I think we're turning in the right direction as far as beer styles and what consumers can expect.
Yeah, I'm amazed with the numbers, beers that breweries are putting out these days. And 15 years ago, you never would have thought of doing some of the beers that are out there now, and the quality of a lot of breweries is amazing. So the industry's going in a great direction. I still think we've got to take time out to focus on quality, because it does let us down a little bit occasionally. But Tina, I'm getting close to running out of beer. Thanks so much for coming on the BentBrewers Live.
Thank you.
It's great to have
Thanks for having me
on the show, and I hope everyone out there's learned something. So next week we're going to head into the Brewpub for Brewpub Series Part 2. We're going to be talking about our BentSpoke birthday and turning number 6, and what that means to all of us here at BentSpoke, but also where that sort of sits us in the beer industry in Australia. We're going to be releasing our birthday beer, and I'll be going through all that. And for Michael and everyone else that's asked me over the last 6 years, I'm going to tell you what's in Crankshaft. So cheers, tune in next week.
Awesome.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks, Richard. Thanks, everyone.